Armstrong Sims.
Welcome back into the Petty Clinic Low T Bears Den. Happy Thursday, everybody. The sun is shining. It's a beautiful weather outside. Yes, Baylor baseball lost, but you know what? We're still having a good day because it's Jersey Thursday up in here. And NBA draft time. It's time to make some decisions. And we got Kendall Kaut on the show from Our Daily Bears today. Kendall, it's time to make some decisions, and some guys have not made decisions.
If you will, in an ode to what Reagan talking about Barry Goldwater in 64, we were ready to give takes, and we were done with our last Reagan Goldwater take as well.
I tell you what, we are right there. This may even be more monumental than Goldwater, Reagan Goldwater, with Jared Butler, Matthew Meyer. You know, you got the draft prospect of Mark Vital and Maceo Teague as those guys are trying to go pro. Those storylines have been huge all offseason, really overshadowed almost by the national championship. Those guys have flown a little bit more under the radar. For you, though, storyline-wise, what has been the biggest for Baylor men's basketball in the offseason when it comes to those guys that have NBA prospect?
Sure, I think Davion's going to get drafted pretty highly. He ranges somewhere in the 6 to 10 range. So I think that's a huge compliment to Baylor that if he had left Auburn after his freshman season, he wouldn't have gotten drafted. If he had left after his sophomore year, might have tested well enough in his own testing. There would have been testing with COVID situation hanging over the world. But I think his rise is probably the best thing for Baylor in terms of what they can sell to prospects in the future. But I think with the guys we might focus on a little bit more today, Drake, I think it's that Baylor should have at least 2 guys drafted, and they'll have multiple guys with a chance to play in the NBA.
Kendall, with that, I want to start with Matthew Meyer, who many have said, you had Paul Biancardi on the show pretty recently and said, listen, Matthew Meyer right now out of this entire team, the last day when it comes, Judgment Day comes for NBA draft guys, of all the guys on the roster, he's got the best prospect right now. For him, though, he declared he's in there. A lot of these mock drafts have him really late second round, and he hasn't said anything about coming back yet. I mean, we are getting about as close as you can get. What do you make of Matthew Meyer not saying whether or not he's returning to Baylor?
Drake, if I were Matt, I'd go through the full process. They always say it takes one team to fall in love with you. But that's also kind of the same deal where, well, it does take one team to fall in love with you. You got to find your match eventually in the process. If you're Matt, the people who really, really love Matt are the analytics models. And if you hate data nerds, you can hate them for this if you want Matt to return to school. But John Hollinger, formerly a senior vice president for the Grizzlies, now writes for The Athletic, had formerly written for ESPN. Have you ever seen the statistic player efficiency rating, or PER? He's the guy that invented that one. So if you've been tired with Jordan LeBron debates and PER having its main role there, if you hate war in baseball, it's kind of basketball's version of a worse version of war there. But John Hollinger absolutely loves Matt Meyer, and it's not hard to see why. In the limited minutes he played this season, given Baylor's very talented roster, he excelled in those statistics. Then 6'9", can handle the basketball, shoots over 40%. With the way the league has moved toward wings and how there's kind of a dearth of wings in the league that are very high-level players, it makes sense why Matt would get the attention. But I've been a guy that has said since he was a freshman, he's followed the trajectory of Taurean Prince. So there's a good case that if he comes back, I think he could be a riser in the NBA, because the people who look at the analytics models might have a question about, well, if he only plays 15 minutes a game, how does he go from this role to a lead role? Ultimately for Matt, though, it's a decision where I wouldn't blame him either way. I don't know how the feedback will win out. I would guess a lot of draft team war rooms will say our analytics models love him. They really like talking with him because he's a fun guy to talk to and he's very candid when you speak with him. But a few people might say, well, there could be some benefits to coming back for a year. So it is a true decision for Matt Meyer.
Kendall, 2 of the biggest names out there in college basketball that folks were wondering what they would do being Hunter Dickinson and Drew Timme from Gonzaga and Michigan and Gonzaga. Those guys have both declared, made their decisions. Dickinson saying, I'm going to the NBA. Drew Timme saying, I'm coming back. I thought, that Matthew Meyer, with those decisions, would be pretty quickly behind them, that or even right before them, but still nothing from him. Again, does this surprise you at all that he has taken this long?
It doesn't for me, Drake, because I think that those guys play a different position. So Hunter Dickinson, I think, is going through the process and could still go pro, but he hasn't signed with an agent in his announcement. And Drew Timme announced he's coming back. I think the difference for Matt is because he can play at the wing position, which is more valued than being a big guy who can't switch pick and rolls. He has a defined role in the NBA. So I think that's a little bit different for him and his perspective. So I think it's worthwhile for Matt to go through the process. Or maybe if you're Drew Timme, probably not a lot of good coming from the process. You just got to come back to school and show on the tape when you face a team with guards that are elite, maybe not a team as good as Baylor, but still elite guards, that you can defend them on the perimeter. And if you can't, a lot of big men like Joe Okafor dominated in college basketball. But in the modern NBA, if you can't defend in space, there's just not much of a role for you.
Kendall, along with Matthew Mayer and his draft decision and process, when you think about his possibility of coming back another year, how much would that behoove him? I mean, is that a move that's going to benefit him in the long run from your perspective?
I think it really could. There are examples, both pro and con, for returning or not returning. Some guys come back for their senior year, they find out they're not going to get drafted, and you want to cash the checks while they're still hot. I think the optimistic case for Matt coming back, and one that I am somewhat partial to, but I don't know his full situation, I don't blame him either way, is that I think if he returns, he'll be a predominant scorer on the team. I think it's pretty clear him and Adam Flagler will take the most shots next season, or at least framed that way. And I think if he can play that many minutes and have his offseason focus be that he's going to be a very good on-ball defender, maybe that's one of the questions about Matt. I really think he could rise in the NBA draft like Taurean Prince did. If Taurean had left after his junior season, I think he's probably a late second-round pick. He comes back, moves his way up into the lottery. Maybe Matt doesn't move all the way up into the lottery, but he has a real shot to move up like Taurean Prince did, like Corey Kispert did, like Buddy Hield did. He may not produce as much as Buddy Hield because his team won't rely upon him quite as much as the Hield team did, even though they had Isaiah Cousins and Jordan Woodard, who were good players. But I think that Matt has a real opportunity to move up in the draft, but I can't blame him either way if he says, I want to cash the checks now, or I want to wait a year to cash them.
Certainly preseason first team all Big 12, possibly all Big 12 player of the year. I know he'll be in that conversation in the preseason, at least if he does come back. On to Jared Butler. I know he's a guy that we've had a lot of conversations about on this show, just he's been pretty much silent since the national championship. You thought maybe after graduation he'd come out and say something, whether it be I'm staying or I'm going. From what you've seen, what is his best case scenario if he does declare for the NBA draft?
I think in terms of draft position, his best case that he might work his way into the lottery. Jared's biggest, I think, selling point, and when I talked to him in February, I just mentioned, hey, I'm not asking you what you're going to do with the NBA draft or anything like that, but I'm just saying, if you do meet with the teams, you might want to remind these fools that you're a lot younger than your average college junior, right? Jared is not 21 years old yet. You mentioned Hunter Dickinson to start out with Drake. Hunter Dickinson is a freshman, is actually 3 months older than Jared Butler, a junior who has just graduated from college. And the analytics models that now dominate a lot of NBA draft discussions, age is a huge factor in those because the concern about your ceiling, and if you're younger, you can rise up more than somebody else. Well, with Jared Butler's ceiling being high, I think age is a big factor. And then the second one, I think might fly under the radar a little bit for Jared, is he decelerates so incredibly well. And that's an athletic skill that, although Jared's not going to have the vertical leap that some guys will have that will go around him or even a little bit below him in the draft, his ability to stop so quickly is an athletic skill that's been undervalued in the NBA. James Harden, Luka Doncic. I'm not saying Jared's going to be one of the 15 greatest basketball players of all time like that duo might end up with, but the ability to decelerate is an athletic skill that I think is very undervalued right now. I think that's something that might stick out for Jared as he compares himself to other guards in the NBA draft.
Kendall, when it comes to Jared Butler, I mean, he's a culture guy, as culture as they come. I've been around a lot of basketball players that come through a program, they treat it as a job, they're getting to the NBA. For Jared, I see him at sorority events. He's hanging out with the fraternity guys. He's out at the Oso pool, chilling, shooting hoops with Matthew Mayer. He's a college kid. Like he thoroughly enjoys being at Baylor and being a college kid. And he has bought into the Scott Drew culture. With a guy like that, I mean, does that point to, hey, there is a chance that he does come back?
I would be absolutely shocked, Drake, if Jared Butler came back. I think when you've graduated from college, when you've won the most outstanding player at the Final Four, if you come back, you have to wonder, will the coaches in the league be idiots again and make Cade Cunningham player of the year? Why would they give it to you the next season when you're clearly were the best player in the league? That was a travesty on par with anything we've ever seen in humanity. We need a commission to investigate the results of that election more than any election in American history. That was absolutely an abomination that Cade Cunningham won that award. But I don't think, if it were me, I would not come back if I were Jared Butler. He might make a different decision. He might decide something differently. But if I'm him, there's just no way I'm coming back. When I've won the national title, I won the AP Big 12 Player of the Year. Shouts to the media on that one. The media gets attacked sometimes, but media did a good job there. And you've been the Big 12 Player of the Year. Like, I just don't know what you show next season that you haven't shown before, and you're a year older. You graduated from college. It's time to move on, I think, if you're Jared Butler, and I would go to the NBA draft if I were him. But if he decides to go a different route, he hasn't announced yet, you'd welcome him back if he decided to come back. But if I'm him, I'm definitely gone.
We're 48 hours-ish away from the deadline where guys have to officially declare for the NBA draft. If you are a guy, I mean, let me start here. Have you ever seen someone wait this long into the process to say, okay, I'm going to go to the NBA draft?
I think there are guys that sometimes wait a little bit longer. And Jared was a guy, I think, last season that waited until about the last day to return to school, which was longer than almost anybody waited to come back. So that's a sign that Jared often takes his time in the process. You can't really talk to agents ahead of time. So that would otherwise be a reason why he might wait a little bit to declare for the NBA draft. But look, crazy things happen in 2021. We don't know what caused COVID, whether it was that lab or somebody eating a bat or one of those other weird animals. So mysteries abound in society when things are strange, but I would be absolutely shocked if he elected to come back. I think the right move for him is to go pro, but people sometimes do wait a while. I know that always gives people a little bit more hope, but I would be pretty surprised if he elected to return. But play this clip back at me in a few days and be like, on Up-Tempo, Kendall looked like the dumbest man of all time. Shouts to Up-Tempo, they got him. And I'd be like, well, if I was going to get got, I'm happy I was got on Drake's show.
Well, I'll tell you, let me ask you this then. You know Jared very closely. I know you said you haven't had that conversation, which I admire that you haven't asked him blatantly, are you staying or going? Because journalists that do that, when you call someone on your show on the cell phone, they have no idea they're on the air and they say something. That's the worst. That's the bane of my existence as a journalist. But for you, and I know you, again, for the folks listening, you haven't had that conversation with him where you've asked him blatantly. But if you were to guess, and this is complete speculation, but a percentage chance in your mind that he goes to the NBA right now, what would it be?
The percent chance that Jared Butler is not back at Baylor, and this is just a guess for me. It is not me, saying anything else. So again, play it back. And if I'm wrong, but I would say 99% that he is not back at Baylor. You hold out the 1% chance, but watch, there'll be an announcement literally while I'm talking that says he's returning to make me look like the dumbest man in America. But I think he's gone. But again, I haven't asked him directly, are you declaring for the NBA draft at the end of May? I haven't asked him that question directly, and I didn't ask him when I saw him earlier this month.
Kendall, is there any benefit to waiting this long in the process to declare or at least test those waters, or are you always going to be more benefited by declaring early and then coming back if need be?
I think it makes sense if you're him to maybe wait a little bit longer, talk with agents, see what's going on in the process, go through graduation. So he graduated, so that only happened a few weeks ago, which might have delayed his ability to speak with and talk with agents while he finished up his time in school, enjoyed the parade, did all of that. So I think it was a little bit different for him versus maybe some of the other guys that have declared nationally. So I think that makes sense to delay in the process. I don't read that as evidence he's definitely coming back or that the odds improve for that. But again, I'm really setting myself up here, but I just don't think he's going to come back. So I'm ready to get dunked on. I don't think he's coming back. Quincy Miller once told us he was coming back and then didn't come back. So I'm always hesitant to say that anything's definitive in this game, but I would just be absolutely shocked if he elected to return. And I think it would be a kind of strange move to make.
Well, Kendall, now that Drew Timme has announced he's coming back, one can only assume that Butler will do the same just to clap him one more time in a national championship game. Let's hope so at least. But I do want to know, and this isn't even whether Jared Butler comes back or does not come back. There just feels like there's not enough room for everybody on this roster right now. I'm looking at my starting five: Akinjo, Flagler, Brown, Meyer, Thamba. And you still have coming in Sochan, who's going to be a star in the game as well. And then I'm missing, so I got Miller, Sochan, or Brown, Sochan, and Langston Love, Cryer, Turner, JTT, Danger, Thamba, Bonner, the list goes on. Are there too many cooks in this kitchen right now on this roster? What's going to happen this offseason to really dwindle down who's going to be a star next year?
Yeah, there are a lot of really good players on Baylor's roster, and it's pretty clear that at least a couple of guys who are good enough to play at other spots may not get quite as many minutes at Baylor, but they might elect to say the development that's happened at Baylor with all the guys that have gotten so much better, it's worthwhile to maybe sit out a year or play fewer minutes this season. I think LJ Cryer will probably play quite a few minutes in that listing of guys. I think that starting lineup makes a lot of sense. I also think it makes sense to maybe play LJ in the starting lineup and go with three guards. It might make sense to put John in the starting lineup. If Jeremy's ready to go right away, maybe he starts. A lot of different guys could start. There are so many permutations. I talked last season about, you could make arguments about, well, should Matt play more minutes? Should Mark actually?
Zach Randolph to me in the NBA that just makes your life a living hell as a defender. And then a guy like Maceo Teague that uncharacteristic shot, yes, but as long as you can make it, come to the NBA and shoot it. Those two guys, where do you see them landing here in this offseason?
Sure. So I'll go with the order you went with, Drake. So Mark, I think three questions for him will be: first is age, a little bit older, coming out of Louisiana and staying in school for 5 years. Second will be height. Does he actually measure in quite as high as listed by Baylor at the combine? Davion Mitchell and Jared Butler I've stood next to and are every bit as tall as they say. I haven't stood next to Mark in person, so I don't know if he's actually as tall. I've seen him from 20 feet away, but if he measures in at like 6'3" or 6'4", is that a little different than being 6'5" or 6'6"? And the third thing, I think what will ultimately kind of frame, can Mark play in the NBA some days? Can he shoot threes? PJ Tucker, when he left Texas, couldn't hit a three at all, eventually developed the shot. If Mark can develop a three-point shot, he's got a real chance to play in the NBA with how good he is as a defender. And as he will rightfully say, he's a very underrated passer. So I think that's the question. Can Mark develop a three? If he can, I think he has a real shot to play in the NBA, and that'll kind of determine that. As far as Macio Teague, I don't know that he'll play in the league right away. He's in the top 100 on Sam Vecini's draft board, but he has a little bit of that Royce O'Neal quality where he's so skilled at different facets of the game that I could see him breaking in 2 or 3 years. Maybe he goes to Europe, dominates over there, and they say, okay, this guy can do something unique. I think his very good wingspan, how he guarded power forwards, will stick out to teams as a guard who can switch on to bigs. So that becomes a more prevalent defensive system in the NBA. And I think the second thing that really could help Macio out is, will there be a backlash to the era of increased three-point shooting in the NBA? And baseball's kind of gotten ruined by it's either a home run, a strikeout, or a walk. Basketball's had that three-point revolution where now every team, because of analytics, just wants to shoot 1,000,000 threes. I like that style of play. There's a fair pushback that says, should we have more diversity and styles of play like there is in college basketball? I think if that happens, there might be a real pushback if they move the three-point line back, if they shrink the paint. If just something changes in the game, maybe how defenses are called, maybe how legal defenses shift, that really could happen. If you're Macio Teague and you're such a good mid-range shooter, and the man works the glass more artfully than a ceramic artist, I think that kind of skill could become more useful in future years. With how diligent Macio is in his work form, I think he might be a guy that plays in Europe for a couple of years. Maybe he plays in the G League for a year or two. But I think he's got a real chance to play in the NBA. And if he ever does rework that three-point shot, it's so effective, but he might want to get just a little bit quicker release. He does that. I think he's got a really, really good shot of being an NBA player someday.
Well, Kendall, I'll tell you this past Baylor team, national champions, so much pro prospect on the squad. And I think, storylines abound for everything they've done with the national championship and now these guys and where they'll end up pro-wise. We got 48 hours. You're on the clock with the Jared Butler stuff. I mean, I've got it clipped and ready no matter what happens. You're either a genius that called it on this show, or we've been 50-50 on it, or we just, I tell you what, hopefully your bosses aren't watching from ODB.
I have really put myself out there for that. I think he's going to go pro, but you got the clip ready. And I'm like, Drake, you do go to school with him, so it will be funny if you're like, well, no, I saw him at a party. He told me he was coming back. And I'm going to be like, oh, geez, Drake, you set me up to get got on this one, but I'm setting myself up to get got.
To get got. I love it. Well, I'll tell you, I have not seen him at any parties recently, or no Bible studies either. It's been summer, so we're all chilling. If I did, I probably wouldn't have asked him. Or maybe I would have. Well, who knows? Who knows? But we'll find out in the next 48 hours. Kendall, our Bear Games question of the day today. We're around baseball. Baseball's going on right now. We've been talking a bunch of Baylor baseball. If you could play one position on the baseball field for Baylor in one certain season, whether it be that 2012 run, the 2005 World Series, 2018 Big 12 Championship, which year are you playing and which position?
So do I get to be good at the position? It's not like I have to play the position with.
You are first team All Big 12, possible AVCA All American.
Excellent, because I was like, if you just took me and put me on the team, it would be a catastrophe for America. I would play on the 2012 team. I liked the slogan "Feed the Beaver." It was a fun slogan to have had back then. So I appreciate that. I never bought a T-shirt that had that phrase on it. And it's a regret that I think about every day of my life, which also might show that my priorities are way out of line. But I think I'd play in that era, and I think it'd be a DH. Because I think it would just be cool to only have to hit and then just, hang around in the dugout all the time and be like, I'm going to hit some dingers when I come up to bat, which also might show that maybe I'm not as enthusiastic about baseball as I should be. But DH, I think, would be really cool. Then you get in fights with the National League fans and say, this is real baseball. I'm real baseball.
I love it. Lock it in. DH on the 2012 team, hopefully taking that team to the College World Series, which just an out away. Feed the Beaver. That series is the reason I came to Baylor. That super regional. So, one of these days they'll make the World Series again, hopefully soon. Kendall, I want to thank you for joining us, giving your NBA perspective on these guys moving forward, and we'll see with Jared Butler.
Heck yeah, always a pleasure, Drake.
I love it. Again, Kendall Kaut of Our Daily Bears joining the show today. When we come back, we're joined by Konstantin Franzen and Sven Law, Baylor's double pairing, who's in the Final Four. That's coming up after this break. That was Kendall Kaut, ODB, talking Baylor basketball. Don't go anywhere. The doubles tandem of Baylor men's tennis joins us next. This is Up Tempo.